Well, there was further confirmation this week of the gender pay gap. A report by the World Economic Forum shows that at current rates, it will take another 118 years to close the gap between what men and women earn globally.
Well, joining us to discuss this is Jade Green, Managing Director of Velocity Consulting. Jade just won bronze twice in the Stevie International Business Awards for her female-run recruitment business, which she started 4 years ago. Jade Green, good morning. Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You strike me as someone who doesn't really sort of look at barriers and think, you know, that there is a problem there. You leap over them. You've described as someone who, you know, is a bit of a tomboy. You like to get out there. You're on the sporting field as well. What do you think it is that drives you in particular to achieve your goals and the awards that you've won so far?
I'd say that probably my childhood. I had an interesting childhood. Had a bit of adversity growing up, which made me be a bit tougher and a bit stronger. Growing up as daddy's little girl made me a bit more of a tomboy, and never had the disparity between being a boy child or a girl child, and kind of encouraged to look beyond that and just be who I wanted to be, and be a tomboy if I wanted to, and not worry about what gender I was and let that hold me back. So got into sport quite young and wanted to push myself to achieve. So I've always been that person that, you know, doesn't believe that anything can hold you back. If you want to do it, you'll go after it and get after it.
So with that background, and given that you're in the field of recruitment, do you approach recruiting in not looking at a gender at all, saying a woman would be best suited for this role or a man would be? It's just who is the best person regardless of gender?
Yes, most certainly. So I specialise specifically in sales and executive recruitment, and we do find in a lot of our clients they would prefer a female if they could get it, based on gender diversity goals that they've got within their businesses. So they might prefer it, but all of them are very specific in terms of it's whoever is the best person for the job.
So it's still obviously merit-based, even though you're trying to set those goals as well.
Yeah. They have an ideal goal of if they could get some more females into the workforce, especially in the sales field. However, it's always definitely merit-based. Who is the right person for the job? Who's got the qualification? Who's got the personality? Who's going to be the culture fit?
So perhaps does disparity start earlier in the piece, say in terms of decisions that young girls are making about where they take their education, about whether or not there's enough support for career development, so that you have those skills to be able to take those jobs?
I think that the issues start way back in school, and it's as simple as even kids playing in the playground and a girl can't play that sport because that's a boy's sport, or being held back from doing something because they're a girl. So I think it's about making sure that those lines are not there from the start, because once a girl gets that in their mindset, that may hold them back as well, and then they've got a unconscious sort of bias towards doing one thing or another thing. Whereas if everyone was just looked at on their merit and their skill and their ability and paired up in that respect rather than boy or girl, even age-wise, I think if you look at just the physical ability when it comes to sport, or the mental ability when it comes to academics, and taking out anything else, then that will groom everyone moving forward.
So does that surprise you, that World Economic figure that said on current rates, it would take another 118 years to close the gender gap globally? Obviously, there are some countries that lag way behind, but we are hearing that Australia is slipping back again.
Yeah. It did surprise me to see that it seems to have stalled so much, because I think they said in 2006 we were at the same level as what men were. So it's quite shocking to hear that we've stalled so much. I think in Australia there's different industry sectors that are more affected than others. We find in sales it's less affected, but if you look at, say, finance and insurance, there's a big gap. But I think that's mainly because of the unconscious bias of hiring managers. So a bit of the old school boys club mentality.
We also see the very top too, of course. It's perhaps a reflection on where we're at, that they're still making headlines when you get a woman who's a chief executive.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the unfortunate thing, isn't it? Why is it such a big deal? As long as we make it a big deal, then there's always going to be an unconscious bias behind, like, why is it a big deal? It just should be the norm. And again, I think that's because, you know, there's things like child rearing comes into effect, and that affects a girl's career, how fast she can progress, how much time she has out of the workforce, and that will also have an unconscious bias on the hiring manager. If they have a family, how much time is that going to take out? And that's just the reality of things, and unfortunately that can prevent people from getting progressed through, even if on merit they are the more suitable applicant.
So perhaps it does come back as well to cultural, societal attitudes around who carries the weight of responsibility at the home as to how that translates in the workforce too.
Yeah. And also, depending on the government in each of the countries as well, what sort of support is there for getting women back into the workforce? So if you look at Sweden and Norway, they're sitting at the highest level in terms of having the lowest gap in the inequality, because they've got such a strong support system for getting women back into the workforce. So the childcare is there, the support is there to help someone get back into the workforce and have minimal downtime, even if the female is the primary caregiver.
Yeah, I think in fact with the provision of benefits for families, that it's actually encouraged for men to take out paternity leave,
Yes.
and in order to be eligible for funding. So perhaps, is there scope for Australia to look at alternatives in the way that it structures those schemes?
There's definitely some progressive companies that are starting to really encourage the male to take that duty on as well. I'm quite fortunate because of the circle I run in and the other sort of female entrepreneurs or business leaders that I associate with. I do get to see a fair bit of the husband taking the year off and being the primary caregiver, but usually it's because they've had a really successful career and their career can afford it. They're looking for a bit of time out as well, and it allows them to go and take that year off and allow the female to step forward.
Yet still you've got to overcome a bit of stigma, haven't you, as far as the male is concerned, in that
Yes.
if you're sent to step back into that role, well, what are you doing to your career?
Yeah. It is unfortunate that the circles, especially within Australia, the tall poppy syndrome and things like that as well, that the guys do get a bit of a beating from their mates about going home and playing daddy daycare, or not really giving the respect that's deserved. And that's because I think just from childhood, the women aren't given the respect that they deserve on how hard a job it is to, and how much of a full-time position it is.
Most important job you'll ever have.
It's 24/7. It's a lot harder than I think a lot of men realise, but that's because of the way that they may have been brought up, and that's also generational, so what their perspective is on that.
Jade, for you personally, what do you think has been the biggest factor in terms of your success, how you've been able to drive your career forward?
Yeah. Personal intrinsic motivators. I'm an ultra competitive person. Everyone that knows me usually describes me as passionate and dedicated and driven. I think I've just always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder in terms of achievement. I have always wanted to be one of the boys and prove that I'm as good. So whether that's coming through from surfing or playing football to joining a company where I was the only female, and them telling me that one of the reasons why they weren't going to hire me in the first place was that I'd be the only female in the company, and they weren't sure that was going to work out, so they'd said no to me.
In fact, they said no more than once, I believe.
Yeah, they said no 10 times. That had to do with my experience not being relevant. I used to be a Bundaberg rum rep, and they didn't see that translating to being a recruitment consultant. But when it came down to it, they'd had a previous issue with a girl working for them, and they didn't want to have only one female in the company, and they didn't think that that I'd have the drive or tenacity to push that. That probably gave me the extra push, so I went in there to smash all of their records. And
well, and now you're a role model to many.
yeah, thank you.
Jade Green, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.